A company's long-term survival depends on its ability to ever increase its productivity. Productivity. What is productivity? Today we find this word in articles, papers, lectures, books, all over the place. But can any one of you define precisely what is productivity? I believe that productivity is the act of bringing the company closer to its goal. Every action that brings a company closer to its goal is productive. Every action that does not bring the company closer to its goal is not productive. So the real question is, what is the goal of a manufacturing organization? By the way, when we are talking about manufacturing organization, we do not talk about the section that manufactures. We are talking about the entire organization, that its survival depends on manufacturing parts. So, now we have to find out what is the goal of such an organization. I believe that the easiest way to answer this question is by the elimination process. Let's find out what is not the goal. I think that you all agree with me that the goal of a manufacturing organization is not to consume raw materials, even though some people in the purchasing department behave as if it was a goal. The goal of a manufacturing organization is also not to provide work to workers. We haven't created our plants in order to provide work. The goal is also not to produce products, as so many companies have discovered lately when they have been stuck with huge inventories of finished goods. The goal is also not high quality. It might be a mean, but it's not the goal. The goal is not to be at the forefront of technology. That's not the goal. The goal is also not to capture a market share. Once again, it might be a mean and not the goal. So what is the goal of a manufacturing organization? The opt philosophy assumes that the only goal of manufacturing is to make money. Making money is the only goal. Everything else is a mean to achieve the goal, not the goal itself. Correct purchasing, producing products, good human relationships, high quality, good technology, capturing a market share, are all just mean to achieve the goal, not the goal itself. Now that we have stated what is the goal of the manufacturing organization, we have to define it more precisely. We have to understand what do we mean by the words making money. We have to understand what do we mean when we regard the manufacturing organization as a money-making machine. In order to do so, we have to define measurements that will enable us to understand whether or not we are making money. It is quite clear that we need, first of all, an absolute measurement, like net profit. But this will not be enough. We need a relative measurement as well, like return on investment, or as it's called, ROI. Why do we need both of them? We need net profit, first of all, because if I'm telling you that a company is making 30% return on investment, it still doesn't say if the company is good or bad. If the total investment is $10, 30% return on investment is not a big deal. But if the investment is $1 billion, wow, what a company. Likewise, net profit by itself is not enough. If we say that the net profit is $1 million, is it a good company or not? Well, it depends. If the investment in this company was, let's say, $100, what a company. But if the investment was $1 billion, well, it's not the best company in the world. So we need both measurements. But these two measurements are not enough, as too many companies have found out. We need a third measurement, a measurement of survival. Something like cash flow. If we have enough cash flow is not important at all. If we don't have enough cash flow, nothing else is important. Most companies go bankrupt, not because they don't have enough net profit, not because they haven't scored high on return on investment, but simply because they ran out of cash. They hit the red line of survival. They didn't have enough cash flow. So we see that when we look on making money, we need all three measurements. Naturally, we can increase net profit on the expense of return on investment, or vice versa. We can increase net profit today on the expense of net profit in the future. This is what I call making policy. But in this program, I'm not interested in determining good policies, in standardizing the proper ratio between the three measurements. What we are interested to do in this program is to determine the goal of making money for any company under any policy. And the goal of making money is to increase all three measurements, to increase net profit, to increase return on investment, to increase cash flow simultaneously today as well as in the future. That's the goal. Not simply to increase net profit by itself, not to increase return on investment by itself, not to increase just cash flow, but to increase all three of them simultaneously. But if we will stop at this point, it will be very, very hard to derive operational rules that the local areas in manufacturing can follow. What we have to do is to define another set of measurements that are equivalent to these measurements. Equivalent in the sense that the new set of measurement will provide us a mean to evaluate whether or not we are making money. Let me suggest this new set of measurement, and it is throughput, inventory, and operational expense. But since there are so many buzzwords floating around, let's define each of them very precisely. Throughput, according to the OP definition, is the rate at which money is generated by the system through sales. Through sales, not through production. If you have produced something and you haven't sold it, it's not throughput. Inventory, according to the OP definition, is all the money that the system has invested in purchasing things which it intends to sell. If we look very closely on this definition, we see that it differs quite a bit from the usual definitions of inventory. One major difference is the fact that this definition excludes money added by the system after purchasing. Inventory, as we said, is the money invested in purchasing, not the money added afterwards by the workforce. Another difference between this definition and the usual one is that it excludes some things which we are purchasing but that the system does not intend to sell. Like, for example, lubricating oil for machines. Lubricating oil is not regarded as inventory since the system does not intend to sell it. Operating expense, according to the OP definition, is all the money that the system spends in order to turn inventory into throughput. It's not just direct labor. It's not just the foreman on the floor. It's not just you management. It's also the secretary of the boss. If the boss's secretary does not help in turning inventory into throughput, her salary is not operating expense. It is simply a waste. So let's repeat it. Operating expense is all the money that the system spends in turning inventory into throughput. Why did I deviate it in the definitions of inventory and operating expense from the usual definitions? I've done it in order to eliminate the confusion between direct and non-direct expenses. To eliminate the confusion regarding spending of $1, whether or not it is investment or expense. When we look on the salary of direct labor, how do we treat it? As investment or as an expense? If we look on the added value of the direct workers to the inventory, we basically treat this spending of money as investment. But if the workers stayed idle, then we treat it as an expense. So we have a debate when we are paying the salary, whether or not to regard it as investment or operating expense. In order to eliminate this confusion, we have defined inventory and operating expense the way that we have done it. In order to understand a little bit more, let's look on some other examples. Scrapping parts. Whenever we scrap a part, the system does not intend to sell it anymore, which means that at that moment, the money invested in purchasing the raw materials of these parts is not inventory anymore, it is operating expense. When we look on a machine, the depreciation of a machine is operating expense. When we look on inventory, the money invested in purchasing the inventory is, according to our definitions, inventory. The carrying cost of inventory is operating expense. What is the goal expressed in these operational measurements? It is not to increase throughput. It is not to simply reduce inventory. It is not to simply reduce operating expense. It is to increase throughput while simultaneously reduce inventory and reduce operating expense. It's very easy to do each of them separately. It's very easy to reduce operating expense. Fire everybody. Do you really think that this will bring you to the goal of making money? It's very easy to reduce inventories. Stop purchasing. I don't think that you are going to make money by this action. So the goal is, once again, the goal is to increase throughput while simultaneously decrease inventory and operating expense. It looks as if we are hammering home a point that everybody knows. But in order to see the far-reaching importance of this definition, to understand why did we define so precisely the operational measurements, let's look on how all the Western world is treating the capacity of their plant. In the Western world, we are trying very hard to balance the capacity of the plant. Balancing a plant is attempting to match capacity to market demands. The way that all organizations are behaving today is that they are trying to have capacity from each and every resource to meet exactly the marketing demand. They don't want to have less capacity than is needed, since this will lead to loss of throughput. But they also don't want to have excess capacity, because this is simply a waste. So when demands are falling, immediately we are trying to balance the excess capacity that appears in the plant. Well, of course, we cannot fire a machine. We cannot even say to a tool to take a vacation. But there is another type of resource that we can trim: the workers. So whenever demands are falling, in order to save operating expense, we are trying to lay off people. What we see in every plant is that people are hired, transferred from one department to the other, sometimes laid off, all of it, in order to balance the capacity of the plant to meet market demands. But let's view it according to our goal. Let's view it according to our operational measurements. When demands fall and we are trimming the workforce, trimming the excess workforce, do we increase throughput? No, we are not going to sell more because we laid off some people. Do we reduce inventory? No, it doesn't have anything to do with it. What we are attempting to do is just to reduce operating expense. But we said that the goal is not to look on operating expense in isolation. We said that the goal is to reduce operating expense while simultaneously reduce inventory and increase throughput. So the only justification for trimming the excess capacity can be that while reducing operating expense, we haven't increased inventory and we haven't reduced throughput. Let me emphasize it. There is a hidden assumption here. Assumption that in trimming the excess capacity, we do not affect inventory and throughput. As a matter of fact, this assumption is totally wrong. We can prove mathematically that when capacity is trimmed to meet exactly marketing demand, no more and no less, throughput and inventory are affected. Throughput goes down, inventory goes through the roof. And because the fact that inventory goes up, the carrying cost of inventory, which is operating expense, goes up. So we don't know even if operating expense goes down. In other words, once we prove it, we have proven that balanced plant is a bottomless pit. Let me ask you a very funny question. Is your plant, in spite of all your efforts, perfectly balanced? Is your plant perfectly balanced? No. Have you ever seen a perfectly balanced plant? Have you ever heard of a perfectly balanced plant? No. How come, in spite of so many efforts, of so many people, in so many plants, we cannot bring even one example of a perfectly balanced plant? Let me answer it. Survival is the reason. Because the major force in the plant is survival. And survival precludes balancing the plant. Once we come even close to balancing the plant, throughput starts to fall down, inventory starts to go up more than usual, and we retreat. We add capacity. This is a major reason why we don't see any perfectly balanced plant in reality. Thank you.